The breakfast room at Dunmore Hall had never been a place where things ended. It was a room for beginnings, for tea poured before the day's decisions, for newspapers folded and refolded, for the particular performance of a family that had learned, over 40 years, to keep its silences civil. But on the morning of Sir Reginald Ashford's 63rd birthday, Lady Isabel Ashford sat across from her younger sister and felt something she could not name pressing against the inside of her ribs, something that had been pressing for 3 years and had never found a way out. The silver was polished. The eggs were good. The china had been brought from the cabinet that only appeared on occasions worth marking. Lydia was beautiful this morning. Deliberately, precisely beautiful. Her hair dressed with care, her gown chosen for its effect. The diamond engagement ring catching the November light every time she reached across the table for the marmalade. Isabel kept her eyes on her toast and her hands on the butter knife, and told herself, as she had told herself on every morning that preceded this one, that the thing pressing against her ribs was not grief. It was not grief. It was simply the particular weight of a choice she had made and would not unmake. Then Lydia said her name. Isabel looked up. Lydia removed the ring. Not quickly, slowly, with the deliberate pace of a woman who had rehearsed the gesture and intended every witness to register it. She reached across the white tablecloth and placed the ring on Isabel's plate, on the eggs. The diamond sat in the congealed yolk like a verdict delivered without a trial. "He loves me now," Lydia said. "Enjoy." Sir Reginald's newspaper lowered 3 inches. The footman near the sideboard stopped breathing. Isabel looked at the ring. She looked at her sister's face, triumphant and poisonous and beautiful in equal measure. And she understood, in the way one understands things that have already happened, that this moment had been coming for months, perhaps longer. "I watched you at my engagement dinner," Lydia said. Her voice was steady, rehearsed. "Your face when he raised his glass. The way you left every room he entered for the rest of that evening. The way he talks about your drainage project as though it were scripture, as though the water table on the eastern boundary were the most compelling subject in England, and the only person who had ever understood it properly was you. I did not find a letter. I did not read your diary. I watched my own sister perform composure for 18 months, and I understood, eventually, what the composure was costing her. You gave him to me, Isabel, like a parcel, like one of your charity cases. You told him my sister admires you greatly, and then you stepped back and arranged your face into something serene, and you watched me bloom on attention that was never meant for me." Isabel's hand was on the butter knife. She set it down with care. Under the tablecloth, her hands found each other and gripped. "Not here, Lydia." "Why not here?" Lydia's voice did not rise. That was the cruelest part. It did not rise. "Father is here. The servants are here. Everyone who has watched you dismantle yourself piece by piece for 20 years in service of this family can hear it now. You prescribed Adrian Prescott like medicine. You decided I was broken, and you found the remedy and administered it without asking whether I wanted to be treated. And now he loves me. And you sit across this table every morning with your toast and your accounts and your fury. Yes, fury, Isabel. I can see it. I have always been able to see it, even if no one else at this table has ever troubled themselves to look, and I am supposed to be grateful." "Lydia," Sir Reginald began. "No, Father." Lydia did not look at him. She gave away the man she loved because she decided I was not strong enough to survive without him, and you read your newspaper while she did it. Isabel stood, The chair scraped against the floor, the only uncontrolled sound she made. She did not look at the ring. She did not look at her father. She looked at her sister for 2 full seconds. And then she walked out of the breakfast room, through the entrance hall, and out through the front door of Dunmore Hall into the November morning without a coat. The cold arrived immediately. The particular cold of a morning that had not yet decided whether to produce frost or rain, that held both possibilities in the air like a threat. Isabel's breath was visible. Her hands were clasped so tightly that the knuckles had gone white, and she did not release them. She walked down the drive without looking back. Behind her, Sir Reginald Ashford looked at the engagement ring sitting in the yoke on his elder daughter's abandoned plate. He looked at the empty chair. He looked at his younger daughter, who was still sitting with the particular stillness of a woman who has done what she came to do, and is not certain, now that it is done, whether the doing of it has made anything better. That, Sir Reginald said to no one in particular, is the cruelest thing I have seen at this table, and I have been sitting here for 40 years. Isabel reached the Dower cottage in 11 minutes. She did not weep. She sat at the narrow desk by the window that faced the kitchen garden, and she pulled paper toward her, and she wrote. The first letter went to Mrs. Garner at the linen workshop. The November order was confirmed. The Hatherley estate inquiry should be recorded in the order book pending formal placement, and Isabel would visit the workshop on Thursday to inspect the current bolt. The second letter went to Reverend Collis regarding the school funds. The quarterly allocation had been calculated, the figures were attached, and she would attend the parish meeting on the 14th as previously arranged. The third letter went to Mr. Harding, the trust's solicitor, requesting confirmation of the charter's founding provisions, specifically the clause governing board membership, and the irrevocability of the founder's seat. She noticed, when she set down the pen after the third letter, that her handwriting was heavier than usual. The strokes pressed deeper into the paper than they needed to. She looked at this for a moment. She did not correct it. She folded the letters, sealed them, and set them at the edge of the desk for the afternoon post. Then she opened the trust accounts and began to read. Not to look for errors. There were no errors. She had checked them the previous week. She read them because the numbers were real. April. Mrs. Alcott, school fees, 2 daughters. May, almshouse repairs, east wall. June, Mrs. Price, linen commission, quarterly. July, Reverend Collis, schoolroom materials. The names went on. 14 women whose circumstances she knew as well as she knew her own. 30 children in the schools. 3 years of quarterly entries, every shilling allocated, nothing wasted. She had built this while the sacrifice was in motion. She had built it in the hours she would otherwise have spent in a different kind of life. And she had not, until this morning, understood that what she had built was not waiting and was not consolation. It was simply what she had made. She was still reading when the knock came. She knew before she opened the door. She had known, she supposed, that he would come, that the breakfast would reach him before noon, and that Adrian Prescott, Viscount Hatherley, was not a man who received news of that magnitude and did nothing with it. She opened the door but did not step back from the frame. He was standing on the step. He had come on horseback and not changed his coat, which meant he had left Hatherley within the hour. His hat was in his hand. He looked at her the way he had looked at drainage surveys in the summer she was 22, with the particular attention of a man who is trying to understand a problem he has not yet fully mapped. "Did you give me to her?" he asked. No preamble, no apology for the intrusion. She had always respected that about him, and she respected it now, even though the question arrived like a stone through glass. "I told you to court her," Isabel said. "That is not what I asked." She met his eyes steadily. "Yes, I gave you to her." He was quiet for a moment. His hand rose to the doorframe, not reaching for her, but bracing, as though he needed something solid while the ground reorganized itself beneath him. Her hand was on the door edge. 6 inches separated their fingers on the same painted wood. "Why?" he asked. "Because she was fading," Isabel said. "After our mother." Lydia stopped eating, stopped leaving her room. I could not watch her fade. I needed to stop it. "And you decided I was the remedy." "I decided your attention would restore her. I was right. It did." "You could have told me the truth," he said. "You could have said, 'Isabel, I would have—'" "You would have what?" She kept her voice level. She had had 3 years to prepare for this conversation, and she was not going to lose it now. "Refused. Chosen me while my sister starved herself. I did not give you that choice, because I could not bear what either answer would cost. If you had refused, Lydia might not have recovered. If you had chosen me, I would have spent the rest of my life knowing what my choosing had cost her. There was no version of the truth I could have told you that would have left us all intact." "So you decided," he said. "Alone." Her voice was quiet. "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. He began another sentence. She could see it forming, something longer, something that might have said more. And she closed the door. Not a slam. A deliberate click, the latch settling into place with a sound that was almost quiet. She stood on her side of the door and listened. His hand stayed on the frame. She could not see it, but she could feel the weight of it. The 5 seconds of stillness before she heard his footsteps retreat down the path toward where he had left his horse. She counted them. 5. Then nothing. She went back to the desk and picked up the pen. The notice arrived 3 days later, carried by a servant from Dunmore Hall who averted his eyes when he handed it over and was gone before Isabel had finished reading. Lydia had been appointed to the Dunmore Charitable Trust's patronage board. The letter described her as a patron in good standing. Her appointment ratified by Sir Reginald as chair. An annual review had been called. The date was the 14th of December. Isabel read the notice twice. She set it on the desk beside the trust accounts and put on her coat and walked to Mr. Harding's office in the village. Harding was a small, precise man who had served as the trust's solicitor since its founding. He received her without appointment and without apparent surprise, which suggested the notice had not been entirely unexpected in certain quarters. "The charter?" Isabel said. He opened the document without being asked. He was already on the relevant page. "Section 4, he said, and read aloud. "The founder of the trust shall retain an irrevocable seat on the patronage board, regardless of circumstance, residence, or subsequent appointment of additional members, for the duration of the trust's operation." "Irrevocable," he repeated, looking up at her over his spectacles. "It is a strong word. I chose it deliberately when you dictated the charter." "I remember," Isabel said. "I will be present at the review." "I expected nothing less," Harding said. She returned to the Dower cottage and opened the trust accounts again. Not to read them this time, but to prepare them. She pulled the quarterly reports, the allocation sheets, the correspondence with Mrs. Garner and Reverend Collis, the school attendance records. She began organizing them into a presentation that could be placed before a board and read without her commentary. Every figure clear, every name attached to its circumstances, every shilling accounted for. She worked until the candle guttered. She did not notice when it did. Mrs. Garner met her at the workshop door on Thursday with the expression of a woman who has been carrying news she does not want to deliver and has run out of time to delay. "Word has reached us," Mrs. Garner said. She was a broad-shouldered woman of 50, with hands that showed the work of 20 years at a loom and eyes that showed the work of raising 4 children without a husband. About the review. About the possibility of redirection. She paused. My lady, I need to ask you plainly. Will the 14 women in that workshop have work next month? Her answer came without hesitation. Yes. And the month after? Come inside, Isabel said. Show me the current bolt. The workshop was warm and smelled of raw linen and the particular dry heat of machinery in motion. 6 looms were running. Isabel walked the length of the room, stopping at each station, examining the work, asking questions about thread tension and order specifications that she already knew the answers to. Because asking them reminded the women at the looms that she knew the answers. That she had always known. That this was not a charitable patron touring her donation, but the person who had negotiated the first order and would negotiate the next one. She was examining the finished bolt at the far end of the room, 12 yards of natural linen, tight weave, destined for the Cavendish household. When the workshop door opened and admitted Adrian Prescott, along with a gust of cold air and the first drops of rain, he stopped when he saw her. He recovered quickly, because he was a man who recovered quickly from surprises. She had noticed this about him in the summer they argued about water tables, and she noticed it again now. Miss Isabel, he said, I did not expect to find you here. I visit the workshop every Thursday, she said. You are here about the Hatherley linen order. He produced a folded paper from his coat. The measurements for the dining table. 12 yards, I believe. Before she could respond, the rain arrived in earnest. A sudden November downpour that struck the workshop roof with a sound like applause. Adrian looked at the bolt of finished linen on the table beside her, looked at his coat, and removed it. He draped it over the bolt, covering her work before she had time to step back. Isabel looked at the coat. She looked at him. You covered the linen, she said. Not me. The linen would have been ruined if the roof leaked, he said. You would not have been. But the order mattered, and the linen is worth 12 shillings, and you... He stopped. He tried again. The linen needed covering. You did not. That is a very practical explanation, Isabel said. I am a practical man. She looked at his coat over the bolt of finished cloth. Something moved in her face that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same territory. Mrs. Garner, she said, without looking away from the linen. Please record the Hatherley inquiry in the order book. We will confirm the measurements and send a formal response by Friday. Mrs. Garner said she would, and found something to attend to at the far end of the workshop. Adrian collected his coat from the bolt when the rain eased. He did not press anything further. He folded the order paper back into his pocket and left without asking for anything he had not come to ask for. Isabel stood in the workshop for a long moment after the door closed, looking at the place where his coat had been. And then she turned back to the linen and ran her thumb along the weave to check for irregularities. There were none. She had been carrying the wrong story for 3 years. She understood this in Bowen's office on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting across the desk from the family steward while he kept his eyes on the blotter and told her the truth with the quiet efficiency of a man who has been waiting for this conversation and is not going to make it easier than it needs to be. You told me she needed purpose, Isabel said. You told me that without something to live for, she would not recover. Those were your words. They were, Bowen said. He was a gray man in a gray coat, reliable and unremarkable in the way that made him invaluable. I told you your sister needed purpose. I meant occupation. Parish work, perhaps, needlework, visiting the tenants, something to organize her days around. That was not grief. You said purpose. I did not say a man. He looked up then, not with apology, with the particular directness of someone who has decided that kindness, in this moment, would be a disservice. I said purpose, my lady. You heard prescription. The decision to give her your intended, that was yours. I did not prescribe it. I would not have prescribed it. It seemed to me an extraordinary response to a reasonable suggestion. The room was very quiet. The clock on the mantelpiece counted seconds. Isabel's voice was measured. I see. She stood, thanked him, and left. She walked back to the Dower cottage and sat on the garden bench with the trust ledger in her hands, because she had been carrying it everywhere that week. And she gripped the bench edge with her free hand. And she sat with what Bowen had told her until the cold of the wood came through her glove. She heard footsteps on the garden path and did not look up. Adrian sat down beside her without asking whether he was welcome. He had come from Dunmore Hall. She could tell from the direction he had arrived from. He looked at the ledger in her hands, and then he reached across and took it from her, not roughly, just steadily, the way you take something from someone who has been holding it too tightly for too long. He opened it. He found the first page of entries, and he read aloud. April, Mrs. Alcott. School fees, 2 daughters. His voice was quiet and even, giving each line the weight of a recorded fact. May Almshouse, East Wall repair, June, Mrs. Price. Linen commission, quarterly. He turned the page. July, Reverend Collis. Schoolroom materials, August. Mrs. Harlow, apprenticeship bond. He read on. He did not editorialize. He did not tell her what the entries meant. He simply gave her own work back to her in his voice, line by line, until she heard what she had built. Her grip on the bench loosened. He closed the ledger when he reached the last entry. He set it in her lap. His hand rested on the cover for 3 seconds, on top of her work, not on top of her. And then he withdrew it. Bowen told you, she said. I asked him myself, he said, 2 days ago. She looked at the garden. The November beds were empty, the soil turned and waiting. He told me the same thing he told you, Adrian said. That he suggested occupation, that the rest was your decision. She said simply, yes. I have spoken with your father as well, he said, and with Lydia. She looked at him then. Your father said something I think you should hear, Adrian said. He said, one daughter built an institution that employs 14 women and educates 30 children. The other wore a ring at breakfast like a weapon. He said he has been a fool about many things, but that he can count. Isabel was quiet for a moment. My father has been counting from behind his newspaper for 20 years, she said. He has never once intervened. He is intervening now. He told me to come here. And you do what fathers tell you? I did what you told me 3 years ago, Adrian said. I am trying to learn better judgment. Something shifted in the air between them, not resolved, not even close to resolved, but acknowledged. He stood, retrieved his hat from where he had set it on the bench beside him, and walked back down the garden path. Isabel opened the ledger again. She looked at the entries in her own handwriting. She read them as he had read them, silently, without his voice to give them weight. They held their weight anyway. The news from Lady Cavendish arrived in the form of a withdrawn dinner invitation, delivered by a footman who was young enough to be embarrassed by the errand. The card was brief. The regrets were politely worded. The meaning was not obscure. Isabel held the card for a moment and then set it on the desk. She understood what it meant for the board meeting. If she could not be seen with Adrian publicly without confirming Lydia's account of the courtship, she would have to walk into that boardroom alone, carrying 3 years of accounts and no ally visible in the room. The accusation Lydia had given Lady Cavendish was half true, which made it more effective than a lie would have been. Half-true accusations require no evidence. They only require that someone who is already uncertain decide to err on the side of caution. She sent a note to Adrian, brief, practical. She told him she had received the Cavendish withdrawal, and that he would understand its implications for the board meeting. She told him she did not need him to solve it. She told him she needed the 1823 parish allocation figures by Thursday evening. He arrived at the Dower cottage that night at 9 o'clock, with the parish records under his arm. She was at the desk when he knocked. The trust accounts spread across every available surface. Her defense organized into sections she could place before the board in sequence. She let him in. He sat down on the opposite side of the narrow desk without ceremony and opened the parish records to the relevant year. "Third column," she said. "I see it," he said. They worked. She passed pages. He found entries. He pointed at a figure. She cross-referenced it against the trust's quarterly report. Their hands moved across the same ledger, overlapping at the margins when they were both pointing at the same column, neither of them acknowledging it, because the work was what mattered, and the work was what they were both good at. An hour passed, without either of them speaking, except about numbers. When she finished, she set down her pen and looked up. He had ink on his thumb from the parish register, a dark smear across the pad of his right thumb where he had pressed too hard on a figure that had bled through the page. She reached across the desk and picked up the cloth she used for her own quills. She wiped the ink from his thumb with 3 seconds of practical attention. His hand was still. She set the cloth down and looked back at her accounts. "The 1823 figures support the current allocation model," she said. "The board will not find a precedent for redirection." He agreed quietly. "No, they will not." He gathered the parish records and left at 10 o'clock. She locked the door behind him and sat back at the desk and looked at the ink that had come off on the cloth. Then she looked at her accounts. Then she began checking her figures one final time. Lydia found her in the corridor outside the boardroom at 9:30 the following morning. The corridor was narrow and cold, and Lydia was wearing green, a deliberate choice. The green she knew suited her best. She had the composed look of a woman who has prepared for a confrontation and has decided to conduct it on her own terms, rather than wait for it to arrive unexpectedly. "I want to say something before we go in," Lydia said. "Then say it," Isabel said. "You gave him to me like I was a charity case." Lydia's voice was even. She had moved past the heat of the breakfast table into something colder and more considered. "Like your workshop widows. Like something that needed to be managed and provided for and organized into recovery. You did not love me. You administered me. You decided what I needed without asking what I wanted. And then you handed me a man and watched to see whether the prescription worked. I was not a person to you. I was a problem you solved." Isabel looked at her sister. The trust charter was in her hand. She had been holding it since she left the Dower cottage. "You are right," she said. Lydia had been prepared for several responses. This was not among them. "I decided you needed saving," Isabel continued, "without asking whether you did. I looked at you in your room after Mother died, and I saw someone fading. And I went to the person I trusted most to make something better, and I pointed him at you like a solution. I did not ask what you wanted. I did not tell you what I was doing. I did not give either of you the choice. That was wrong. And I am sorry, not for wanting you to recover, but for deciding alone that I knew the terms on which you needed to do it." Lydia was still. "I was not dying," she said finally. I thought you were, Isabel said. You were wrong. Her voice did not waver. Yes, I was. They stood in the corridor for a moment. The sounds of the board assembling reached them from behind the closed door. Chairs, papers, Sir Reginald's voice giving some instruction to Harding. Lydia looked at the charter in Isabel's hand. She looked at her sister's face. Then she opened the boardroom door and went in. The patronage board of the Dunmore Charitable Trust convened at 10 o'clock on the 14th of December in the east parlor of Dunmore Hall, which had been pressed into service as a meeting room with a long table, 6 chairs, and a fire that had been burning since 7 in the morning and had made the room warm enough to suggest that whoever had ordered it lit had wanted the proceedings to be comfortable. Sir Reginald sat at the head of the table. To his right, Reverend Collis, who had administered the school funds for 2 years and knew the children by name. Beside him, Mr. Harding, with his spectacles and his charter. Across from them, Mrs. Garner, who had accepted the invitation to attend as the workshop's representative with the expression of a woman who was not accustomed to sitting at tables of this kind and intends to do it well regardless. At the far end, Lydia, composed and prepared, her notes in front of her, and beside Lydia, in the irrevocable seat, Isabel, with 3 years of accounts stacked at her elbow. Lydia presented her motion first. She had prepared carefully. Her argument was framed around efficiency, the consolidation of charitable resources, the advantages of directing funds to an established London institution with broader reach. The question of whether a county-level trust represented the best use of the Ashford family's patronage capacity. She spoke for 8 minutes. She did not raise her voice. She did not look at Isabel. When Lydia finished, Sir Reginald looked down the table. Isabel. Isabel stood. She did not argue the motion on its merits. She did not address efficiency or consolidation or the relative virtues of London institutions. She looked at the board, and she spoke from the ground. 3 years ago, she said, I walked into every tenant cottage on this estate, and I asked what they needed. I did not ask what they deserved or what was available or what a family in our position might reasonably be expected to provide. I asked what they needed. Mrs. Garner needed work after her husband died of the lung fever in February of that year. She had 4 children and a loom, and no orders. Mrs. Alcott needed school fees for 2 daughters who were clever enough to go further than their circumstances would otherwise allow. Mrs. Price needed a linen commission to keep the cottage her husband had built with his own hands. I wrote down what they told me. I built the trust around what they told me. I did not build it because I had nothing else to do. I built it because 14 women in this parish had no one else who asked. She placed the accounts on the table. 3 years of quarterly reports, every allocation sheet, every correspondence, every shilling, every figure is there, she said. Every name, every allocation, every quarterly report submitted on time, without deficit, without error. This trust is not a family indulgence. It is an institution with employees and beneficiaries and legal obligations, and it will not be redirected because one member of this board is angry at me for reasons that have nothing to do with linen. This is personal, Lydia said. Everything you have done since the morning of my father's birthday has been personal, Isabel said. She kept her voice level. She had redirected fury into work for 3 years, and she was not going to stop now. You placed your ring on my plate because you had watched me for months and concluded, correctly, that I had directed Adrian toward you. You were right. I did direct him. I did it because I believed you were fading, and I decided, alone, without asking you, without asking him, that his attention was the only thing that could save you. I was wrong. Not wrong to want to save you. Wrong to believe you could not save yourself. I treated you as I treat the women in that workshop, as someone who needed managing. You have every right to be furious. But you do not have the right to destroy 14 women's livelihoods, because your fury needs somewhere to go. The room was very quiet. Isabel looked at the board, at Reverend Collis, who had attended the school's first term and watched 30 children learn to read, at Mrs. Garner, who had 6 looms running and 14 women depending on the orders those looms fulfilled, at Mr. Harding, who had written the word irrevocable into the charter at Isabel's instruction and had never once suggested it might prove inconvenient. I am not asking this board to choose between sisters, she said. I am asking you to read the accounts. 3 years, no deficit, 14 employed, 30 children in school. If those numbers justify redirection, redirect. If they do not, then this motion is not about efficiency. It is about punishment. And I trust this board to know the difference. She sat down. Sir Reginald read the accounts. He read them slowly, turning each page with the attention of a man who is making a decision he intends to be able to defend. The fire crackled. No one spoke. The motion is denied, Sir Reginald said. The trust continues under its current charter. Isabel. He looked at her over his spectacles. You will resume the chair, not as advisor, as chair. Lydia stood. She gathered her notes. She looked at Isabel across the table. Not with the poisonous triumph of the breakfast room, but with something that had been stripped of its performance and was simply, rawly true. You should have told me what you were doing, Lydia said, instead of deciding for me. I should have, Isabel said. I was not dying, Lydia said. I thought you were, Isabel said. Lydia held her gaze. You were wrong. Isabel did not look away. Yes. Lydia left. Not defeated, not vindicated either. Separated, as people are separated when a wound has been named and is not yet healed and may not heal quickly. The door closed behind her. Mrs. Garner caught Isabel's eye from across the table. She nodded once. The nod of a woman whose looms would run tomorrow. Isabel found the corridor by leaning against the wall with the trust charter in her hand and letting the cold plaster hold her upright, while the sound of the board dispersing filtered through the closed door. She had presented the accounts. She had said what needed to be said. The 14 women would have work next month. The 30 children would have school. The drainage ran. The linen was good. These were facts, and facts did not require her to feel anything about them except that they were true. Adrian found her there. He looked at her for a moment, at the charter in her hand, at the wall holding her up, at the particular stillness of a woman who has spent everything she had and is taking stock of what remains. You won, he said. The numbers won, she said. I presented them. You presented yourself, he said, without managing anyone's feelings, without arranging the outcome in advance. You stood in that room, and you were the woman from the drainage field, the one who understood the problem and solved it and did not ask permission. He paused. I have not seen her since the summer I was 22. Isabel looked at him. She looked at the charter in her hand. Then she extended her right hand toward him. The formal gesture, as though they were meeting for the first time, as though 3 years had not passed, and a ring had not sat in congealed yolk, and a door had not been closed with a deliberate click. He took her hand. She did not shake it. She pulled, one steady pull that closed the distance between them. He followed the pull without hesitation. She kissed him with their clasped hands still between them. The charter pressed between their palms, and the corridor was cold and quiet and entirely empty of anyone who needed managing. When they parted, their hands were still joined. That was not a handshake, he said. No, she said. It was a renegotiation. That evening at the Dower cottage, Adrian sat across the narrow desk from Isabel while she opened the trust accounts one final time to enter the board's decision in the record. He watched her write. The candle was good. The room was warm. "You did not mention me," he said. "In the boardroom. Not once." "The boardroom was not about you," she said, without looking up from the accounts. "That is why you are here now and not there." He absorbed this. "Lydia broke the engagement," he said. "She told me this afternoon. She said she could not marry a man who had been handed to her. She called it," he paused. "She called herself Isabel's gift." "She's not wrong," Isabel said. He set his hands flat on the desk. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly. Did you love me? That summer, the boundary walks, the water table arguments." She set down the pen. She looked at him. "I spent 3 years," he said, "telling myself that you withdrew because you had decided I was not what you wanted. That the summer had been pleasant, but not significant. That I had misread everything. I need you to tell me whether I let myself believe a lie you constructed or a lie I built myself." "I loved you," she said. It arrived without hesitation, because she had been carrying it for 3 years, and it had become very simple in the carrying. "I went to you and told you my sister admired you, because Mr. Bowen said she was fading, and I decided, alone, without asking you or Lydia or anyone, that your attention was the medicine she needed. I prescribed you. I gave you away without telling you that you were mine to give. And then I stood beside her at the engagement dinner and raised a glass and told myself the sacrifice was final, and I did not speak of it again." He was quiet for a moment. "I believed you," he said. "When you told me Lydia admired me, I did not question it. I did not look for another explanation. Because in 3 months of drainage arguments, you had never once told me something that was not true. You were the most honest person I knew. You corrected your own calculations when you found an error. You told me when my figures were wrong and when mine were right, and when we were both working from bad survey data. You had earned my complete trust, and you used it." He said the last 3 words without anger, which made them land harder than anger would have. "You used it to redirect my life without my knowledge or consent. That is what I have been sitting with since the breakfast." She held his gaze. "Yes. That is not generosity, Isabel." He leaned forward. "I have been trying to find the word for it. It is not cruelty. It is not malice. It is fear. You were afraid that if you told me the truth, that you loved me, that your sister was ill, that you did not know what to do, I might have chosen you anyway. And then you would have had to live with a choice instead of the sacrifice. The sacrifice was safer. It was noble. Choosing what you wanted would have been terrifying, and you might have been wrong, and you would have had to carry the weight of having chosen yourself. So you chose the sacrifice instead, and called it love, and built a trust and a workshop and 3 schools in the space where a life might have been." The candle moved in a draft from the window. Isabel looked at the accounts. She looked at the pen she had set down. She looked at the man across the desk who had just described her to herself more accurately than she had ever managed. She did not look away. "Yes. So?" He sat back. "What now?" She gripped the desk edge, the question no one had asked her, including herself. In 27 years of being the pillar, the strong one, the sister who gives way, I have never been in a room, she said slowly, where I am not the one arranging the outcome. I do not know what I look like when I am not doing that. She looked at him. Thursday. Dinner at Hatherley. Through the front door. As myself, Not as the woman who gave you away. Not as the woman who runs the trust. As the woman who argued with you about water tables for 3 months and wanted to keep arguing for the rest of her life. Thursday, he said. He stood, collected his coat, and left. She listened to his footsteps on the path until they faded. Then she picked up the pen and entered the board's decision in the trust record in her usual handwriting, steady, clear, no heavier than it needed to be. 6 weeks later, the boundary field between Dunmore and Hatherley was running. The drainage channel Isabel had designed in the summer she was 22. The project that had brought Adrian to Dunmore in the first place. The water table argument that had begun as a dispute about survey data and become 3 months of boundary walks and mutual discovery. Carried water cleanly from the low eastern field toward the outlet she had specified. The engineering was sound. The field that had flooded every spring for 20 years was draining. She had understood the problem and solved it, and the solution had held. She was walking the channel with Mrs. Garner, reviewing the Hatherley estate's new linen order, 12 yards for the dining room, placed through the trust, proper channels, her institution's business. When Adrian arrived on horseback at the boundary marker and dismounted. "Mrs. Garner," he said, "the linen order." "Received, my lord," Mrs. Garner said. "Miss Isabel tells me your measurements are wrong. The dining table is 12 feet, not 10. "Miss Isabel measures everything," Adrian said. "Miss Isabel is generally right," Mrs. Garner said, gathering her papers with the efficiency of a woman who has decided her presence is no longer required. She walked toward the workshop without further comment. Isabel and Adrian stood at the boundary marker with the drainage channel running between the field behind her and the field behind him. "You placed the order through the trust," she said. "Your institution deserves the business," he said. "The linen is excellent." "The linen is adequate," she said. "The pricing is competitive." "I have been thinking," he said, "about what you said. That you wanted to keep arguing for the rest of your life." "I said I wanted to keep arguing with someone worth arguing with," she said. "I had not found anyone worth it for 3 years. You are arguing with me now." "I have not stopped. I simply had no suitable opponent." She looked at the channel. The water moved steadily, without obstruction, following the gradient she had calculated from survey data that everyone else had misread. "You placed the order at 12 yards, she said. "The table is 12 feet. The order is correct. You measured wrong and then ordered correctly, which means you knew I would catch the error and fix it." "I measured the table myself," he said. "Stop measuring your own dining table," she said. "Let me do it." He reached across the fence. He took her hand. The hand that had signed the trust charter, that had written the accounts, that had pointed at a funding motion and said no, that had pulled him down a corridor into a renegotiation he had not seen coming. His fingers closed around hers. "I believed everything you told me for 3 years, he said. "I am asking you to tell me something true now." She looked at the channel. She looked at the boundary line running between their feet, Dunmore on one side, Hatherley on the other. She looked at their joined hands across the fence. "I miss the arguments," she said. "Every day. Not the drainage walks themselves. I had other work to replace those. The arguments specifically. The way you listen when you disagree. The way you correct your own position mid-sentence when you realize I am right. No one else does that. No one else in this county changes their mind out loud while I am watching. No one else argues with me the way you do," he said. "I have tried other conversations. They do not hold my attention." "Then stop measuring your dining table yourself," she said, "and send for me." She squeezed his hand. He did not let go. She did not let go. The drainage ran. The field was clear. The boundary line ran between their feet, and neither of them stepped across it because they did not need to. They stood on it, where two estates met, where two lives that had been interrupted for 3 years by a sacrifice that was fear dressed as love were beginning, on honest terms, to run alongside each other again. The water moved. The linen order was correct. The dining table was 12 feet. She had measured it right.